Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healthy Living, Happy Midlife. I'm Denise Stiegel, the Menopause Mentor. I want to start today's podcast with a moment that many women never say out loud, right? I used to work with a woman, we'll call her Lisa. She sat across from me when I used to work in corporate. And she said something that just kind of stopped me. And I didn't understand this at the time, but she said, I don't understand what's happening to me. I used to run meetings effortlessly. Now I lose my train of thought mid-sentence. Huh. Now, she wasn't new in her career. I was newer in my career. She was obviously not inexperienced. Quite the contrary. She had tons of experience. She was a leader. She was well respected. She was very successful. Um, but she had said that she hadn't been sleeping very well, that she wakes up in the middle of the night um, and couldn't fall back to sleep. And I didn't really think much of it because, like I said, I was quite younger than I am now. Um, but I realized what was happening when, after she said this to me, I started to notice that her patience with her team and the people around her was just not there. It was, I mean, talk about having no patience. You know, her confidence was slipping. Um, she was really difficult to work with, right? And I kind of wondered, I'm like, is she burning out? What's going on with her? Right. And I realize now that she was not obviously losing her ability. She knew what she was doing. She was highly successful, had lots of education and background. But what I understand now is her biology was changing, right? All of us in perimenopause, menopause, and beyond, our biology is changing. Our hormones are changing. Our chemistry is changing. Everything inside of us is changing, literally from our brains to our bladders, right? And one of the first hormones that shifts in midlife, and this isn't even in midlife yet, it's not estrogen, which everybody thinks estrogen is the first thing to go, and then that's the end. It's not. It's actually progesterone. And for many women, estrogen starts to decline at the age of 35. So if I was 25, maybe this woman was 40. So really, she should have been at was really at the height of her career. But I understand now that her progesterone was declining, right? And she probably didn't understand that. Shoot, when I was 25, why would I have understood anything about that? But what I understand now about progesterone and hormones is that it's not a conversation we have with our doctors or our friends or anybody until it really starts to, until we get like the typical symptoms, the hot flashes, like those kinds of things. That's what we typically think of when we think menopause and hormones, right? But for many women, it's actually the progesterone decline that begins our hormone fluctuations, right? And progesterone actually rarely gets our attention. Um, Nobody, it's not something like, oh, my progesterone is high, my progesterone is equal. No, of course not. But also, nobody warns us about it either. And not to say, red flag, warning, warning, your progesterone is declining, but more in an educational way to help you understand that progesterone functions like a quiet stabilizer of your entire system, right? Um, no one tells you this. Back in the day when I started going through perimenopause, it just wasn't talked about. Perimenopause wasn't talked about. It was you were menopausal or you weren't. They didn't talk about the years leading up to it. But I often describe this situation um, in this way, right? If estrogen is the accelerator, right? Progesterone is the brake system, right? It keeps everything from running too hot, too fast, too loud, too crazy, right? Progesterone and estrogen, they kind of work in harmony. And let's think about this, if your brakes are not working, you're going downhill, you're going down fast, my friend, right? Progesterone the thing that I notice the most with progesterone is it helps with deep restorative sleep, not the sleep that you wake up here and there, but progesterone really is part responsible for that real um, refreshing restorative sleep that our bodies need, and that's that 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Progesterone is important for emotional steadiness, right? We think especially in Lisa's case, she was 40. And so, the emotional steadiness was not there, right? I don't want to say she had mood swings, but she definitely was either, she was not quite the woman she was when I first started working with her, right? She snapped very quickly. She was easy to judge. So her emotions just were not in check, right? Progesterone helps with clear thinking. It balances our blood sugar. That's really important because we know as we get older, we start to gain weight, right? And we blame it on, oh, I had 3 children. Oh, I haven't been eating right, or I haven't been exercising enough. And those things do add up. But if our blood sugar is out of whack, then that's just going to affect it even more. Progesterone also helps reduce inflammation, right? We know inflammation is the cause of so many diseases today. So if we can reduce inflammation, and progesterone has that effect, make sure that our progesterone level is pretty good, right? And again, it will calm our stress response, right? This is that flight or fight, yes. Uh, Phenomenon that we have, right? And that actually is regulated, that regulates cortisol, right? If cortisol is high, we're always in that flight or fight mode. Biologically, so let's think about this, right? These are hormones. This is happening biologically in our body, right? Progesterone converts into a compound called get this one, allopregnanolone. Okay, allopregnanolone, really long word. And what this does is it actually it activates the GABA. Okay, we hear that we should take these GABA supplements for if we're having trouble sleeping, right? This is the brain's calming neurotransmitter. Okay, so we need those. So GABA is really important. So again, if progesterone converts to or activates GABA through allopregnanolone, our brain is automatically, calmer. Right? When we don't have the progesterone, it's not activating GABA, and that's where we kind of find that we're not sleeping, we're in that fight or flight mode. Our moods are a little crazy. um, so I guess in simple terms, put it simply, um, progesterone tells your nervous system that you're safe, right? When your brain feels safe, you lead better, you decide faster, you think clearer, right? We don't have that brain pause, brain fog, brain pause, as my friend Lauren reminded me the other day. She gave me that new phrase. Thank you. Um, so a safe brain, again, decides better, leads better, thinks clearer, sleeps better, right? And if you're waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, let me ask, have you ever woken up at 3 or 2 or 4, wide awake, your mind is racing, and you're not really worried about anything in particular? It's just you're awake and you're kind of looking at the ceiling, trying to count sheep and doing all the things, deep breathing, all the things we have been told to do, but nothing is working, right? You're not really worried about anything. But at the same time, you're kind of worried about everything. And things that don't even make sense to worry about, right? You start to, worry about a presentation you have to do in a month. Really, in a month? You start worrying about your parents and your kids and your business and your future and the this and the fate of the world, like all of these things. Not that these things aren't important, but they're really not important enough to be waking up in the middle of the night just to worry about, right? If you can't control something, there's absolutely no reason to um, lose any sleep or any energy on things that you cannot control. And of course, you're going to be concerned for your parents, your kids, your business, your future, all of those things. That's different than getting up and being so worried that you can't go back to sleep. Right. So then what happens? You go to work, you're exhausted, and your brain at some point just refuses to power down, right? So many women think I'm just stressed out, right? But declining progesterone actually weakens your brain's calming pathways. So you think it's just stress, but it's more than that, right? It's the your body isn't able to manage the stress the way it used to. So research shows, I do have the information here. Studies show that progesterone increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, right, which supports memory and cognitive resilience. Easy for me to say today. So when your progesterone drops, most of us women experience brain pause and reduce focus, right? And this isn't about aging. Yes, we are aging as we're going through. I mean, none of us are getting any younger. But this is actually from reduced neurological support, right? Um, all of a sudden, you know, thinking is harder, right? And this actually creates self-doubt, right? You have to think about things a little bit more. Where did I put my glasses? Oh, they're on top of my head. You know, what was the word that I wanted to use for that presentation, right? All of a sudden you start doubting yourself. Um, Something that nobody explained, still explains, nobody explained to me. Um, Obviously during perimenopause, ovulation becomes inconsistent, right? You might get a period this month and that, and then 3 weeks later you have one, and then 6 weeks later you have one. Everybody is a little different, right? Progesterone is produced only after you ovulate. Okay. So if you're not ovulating for 6 weeks, or maybe you skip 2 months, sometimes your periods are continual, right? But while progesterone is now, it's slowly disappearing or slowly declining, right? You're going to start to notice the anxiety, the insomnia, the irritability, um, cravings for sweet or salty, and that emotional sensitivity that it really affects the people around us. They notice it, like you're emotional about things that you were never emotional over, right? And this is often a time when um, women and their spouses or partners really start to struggle because the guy never knows, like, what is she going to freak out about today, right? And as the woman, we don't know either, right? We know something's not quite right, but we can't quite put our finger on it because we don't know, right? All of these happen so differently for each one of us, right? That you get talking to a friend and she'll be going through something completely different, right? But all of these things start to happen well before menopause. Now, menopause is one day of your life. If you've listened to me, I've said this many times. The menopause transition, the menopause year, is when you do not have a period for 12 consecutive months. Okay, on that 12-month anniversary, then you are menopausal, right? That is your menopause day. The very next day, you're postmenopausal. So we really have to understand that this perimenopause time in our lives is really significant when it comes to our mental, physical, emotional health and our careers, right? All of this is not weakness, weak of mind, weak of, body and soul, whatever. It's just physiologic. It's just your body. It's physiology, right? It's your body. It's what it's doing. It's what women's bodies have done forever, right? We're just now able to talk about it a little more clearly, understand what is happening, and to articulate that. Back years ago, women didn't talk about the change. And that's what they said was the change. She's going through the change. I didn't know what that meant, right? I didn't know what that actually meant until I was 37 years old. or 38 years old at that time, because I had no idea that I was beginning to go through what they were calling the change. Um, so I had a client once say to me, you know what, I used to handle pressure, piece of cake. He said, I had a high pressure job, I had busy with my kids, my husband had a business. And so all of these things, like I could handle pressure. She goes, now just the smallest things overwhelming. Have you ever experienced that? Nothing actually changed. She still had her career. Her husband had his business. Kids were a little bit older, but nothing changed really externally. She was still living the same life, right? Same job, same skills, same intelligence. Internally, however, something was different, right? This sleep, the sleep challenge that she was happening, and or that we can experience, um, can happen periodically. It can happen for months at a time. It could stop for a while, right? There are clinical sleep studies, which always are interesting to me. Like at one point, I should just have a sleep study, just to say I've had one and to see what it really is about. But there are some sleep studies that show that progesterone directly improves the deep sleep architecture, right? Independent of hot flashes, all that. So they're studying this now, right? Whereas before it was just kind of a crapshoot. Like people say, oh, well, it's kind of related to, but now we know there are clinical studies out there that connect sleep with progesterone. So again, as your progesterone is declining, that sleep is becoming, you're lighter, you wake up a lot quicker, it's fragmented. Um, Sleep and that loss of sleep kind of changes everything, doesn't it? Right? We know if we're not sleeping, we're tired and we're cranky anyway, right? Elevated cortisol. So lack of sleep elevates our cortisol, right? So if we're not sleeping, our cortisol levels are rising. Um, Elevated cortisol affects, let's go through these again. Decision making, brain pause. We're not thinking as clearly. Our emotional, our moods, right? Call it they call it emotional regulation. We call it mood swings. Let's be real, right? It changes your metabolism. Yeah, people say, oh no, the metabolism doesn't really slow down. Baloney. It changes. It may not slow down the way we talk about it when we gain weight. We say, oh, my metabolism has changed. And we blame it all on that. There's a lot more going on there than just metabolism, but it does affect your metabolism. Bottom line for me, and I see this with so many of my clients, is it affects their confidence. If their cortisol is going up and they're not sleeping, the cortisol is high all the time. They're always in flight or fight not mood, flight or fight mode, and they start to gain weight, right? Cortisol affects weight, weight affects insulin resistance. You see how these things are really connected, right? So imagine if you own a business or you're in your career, right? Running your business on 4 hours of sleep for the next year. Can you do that? This is not about, burnout, right? If you're running your business and you're not sleeping, you're getting 4 hours of sleep every night. Um, we'll say it's burnout, but it's really our neurochemistry. It's our brain is not functioning properly, which isn't rocket science. Let's be real. If we're not sleeping, we know this, but I don't think we connect it so much to how progesterone and cortisol and lack of sleep affects our entire life, right? Not just the way we feel or weight gain, but it affects the way we think. It affects our relationships. It affects our career, right? Um, let's zoom in on this one. I like this study. I like this study only because it was done right down the road. A Mayo Clinic study estimated menopausal symptoms contribute to $1.8 billion of lost productivity in the United States. Think about that. If you're a business owner and you have a woman who's dealing with menopausal symptoms, she's not sleeping, whatever is going on with her, how often is she calling out How often is she coming in late? When she's there, is she fully engaged? Now, that's not because she doesn't want to be. It's just these are things that are happening in her life. Um, Fatigue, the concentration, um, and brain pause, right? We can't think as quickly as we used to. And, if you're like 25-year-old me, you're looking at this 45, 50, 55-year-old lady going, dude, you're beyond the hill. What the hell is wrong with you? Right? You're thinking she's on a decline. She was at the top of her game, but she's not anymore. Right? Um, the interesting thing is in this study, they recognize that hot flashes was not the number one problem. It was brain function. Again, fatigue, poor concentration, memory challenges, that brain pause that I mentioned. Um, Also strongly connected to sleep. Everything is connected to sleep, right? For our hormone regulation, right? Hormone regulation. Dr. Mary Claire Haver says women often believe they're failing professionally when their hormones are actually shifting neurologically. So again, we go back to brain health. And this is the sad bit about this is this happens when we are at our peak leadership years, right? Like I said, 40 to 55, like that's like our peak. We've gone to college, we've gotten our MBAs, we've done all of the trainings, and we've worked our way up. Or if you're a business owner, you have X amount of years behind you in your business, right? And you're at really the peak of your leadership and your business. And that's the exact moment where we need your wisdom and your influence. And it should be expanding, but yet it's contracting because of lack of sleep, hormonal changes, um, and your neurologic changes. Um, for me, the heartbreaking part, um, we don't blame our hormones. Every now and then people will say, oh, my hormones or whatever. But that's not really what happens. We blame ourselves. We think, I need to try harder. I need to be more disciplined at my workouts or my food. I just have to push through this. So what happens? They stay at work longer. They push harder. They sleep less. They're already not getting sleep. They ignore the signals that their body is giving them, right? All of these symptoms are signals. It's not something that's wrong with you. It's your body saying, hey, we need to do something different, right? But what happens is we ignore these, we ignore these and ignore them until we start to notice that our confidence is eroding, right? When this woman who I used to work with, Lisa, I mean, when I first met her, man, she was a dynamo. I wanted to be just like her when I grew up. And by the time I left that job, uh, she was a person who I actually avoided. And that's sad. I could have learned a lot from her. That's sad. Anyway, really what's happening is our internal operating system is changing, right? Nothing's failed. You just need different support. Again, symptoms are signals. So that's something that we have to really understand. I saw Lisa a handful of years ago. So, okay, so I was 25 then and I'm 54 now. So it's been a while, right? And she kind of apologized to me. She's like, understand now how difficult I must have been to work with. She said, after I had left my job, it was pretty clear that people were avoiding her. And she went to see her doctor and she slept through the night for the first time and she says in years. Um, but then she said, the interesting thing was, after a couple of months with that, after seeing her doctor, and she was lucky because her doctor was really supportive of her and very knowledgeable. And she said, the funny thing is, after that, she got a promotion with her job. And she said, it wasn't that, things had changed so dramatically. She said, everything just felt manageable again. I felt like myself again. My confidence was there. I was thinking much more quickly and much more clearly. And again, because of that, she actually got a promotion, right? Um, she said, I just finally understood that my body was telling me something that I was just ignoring. And so what happened? Her nervous system finally was supported, and the clarity that she had been missing for those years followed. So, understanding progesterone changes the entire menopause conversation. Because, yes, that's what we're having here. Because when our sleep improves, our mood stabilizes, our energy steadies, like we don't have these highs and lows with our energy, right? Our focus gets sharper and our confidence comes back, just like Lisa, right? Midlife starts then to stop feeling like we're declining. Let's be real. If you are 50 years old and in pretty good health, your longevity, if you look at the statistics, you're going to live at least another 30 years, potentially 35 to 40 years. If you feel like you're declining now, what are you going to feel like in 10, 15, or 20 years, right? Midlife, once you understand this how menopause affects our body, all of a sudden we start to feel like midlife is more of about recalibrating, right? And empowering ourselves and becoming a new version of who we are, right? Ourselves, but wiser. So I want to leave you with this today. If you are a woman in midlife dealing with menopausal symptoms, wondering why things are feeling heavier, harder, why your resilience is just not there, your confidence is, you feel it's shaky. I want you to hear this. You're not becoming less capable. You're moving through one of the most profound biological transitions in your life. And no one taught you how to navigate it, right? Your body isn't working against you. It's asking you to understand it today. And when you understand your hormones, you don't shrink, you lead differently, you grow, right? You have wisdom instead of exhaustion. You have clarity instead of survival mode, right? And you have power and energy that is sustainable, not forced. Menopause is not a closing chapter in your influence. Okay. For many women, it becomes the moment that they finally lead with their strongest self, the most resilient self. And if you're ready to understand what your body is telling you and support the transition intellectually, intelligently, compassionately, then I invite you to uh, download the menopause self-assessment. First thing you should do, take the assessment. When you take the assessment, it'll give you some information about what's going on with your hormones. And then your second step is to schedule a coaching call with me. This is an actual coaching call because menopause should never cost you your health, your confidence, or your career. It becomes the reason where everything finally begins working with you. I'm Denise Siegel, the Menopause Mentor. I will see you again next time. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Healthy Living, Happy Midlife. My hope is that today's conversation left you inspired, encouraged, and ready to take the next step toward creating a vibrant, fulfilling life that you deserve. Remember, you don't have to settle for fatigue, brain fog, or frustration. Midlife is not the end of your story. It's the doorway to your next best chapter. And I'm here to help you walk through it with energy, with confidence, and with joy. So if you're ready to take this journey further, I invite you to schedule a free strategy call with me. The link is in the show notes. And together we'll design a plan that works for you at this time in your life, for your body. So Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review your show, the show on your favorite podcast platform. Catch the video version on YouTube so you never miss another episode. Share it with a friend who needs to hear that midlife can truly be the most powerful season of her life. Until next time, I'm Denise Stegall, reminding you that healthy living, happy midlife is not just possible, it's yours for the taking.